Hello, welcome to our Tuesday night Torah class. Um, Thank you for coming and for tuning in. My name is Jerry Watkins, and we're going through the Torah on Tuesday evenings. Every week at this time, we go through about a chapter or two, and we're just going through verse by verse, and we're talking about the stories and what they mean, how we should apply them. Let's see. I should pray first. I often forget that, and I don't mean to. Let me pray. Father God, thank you very much for the day. Thanks for the interesting weather we're having today. Thanks for these people that are interested in studying your Torah, and I'd ask that you would just speak to us tonight, that you'd help us learn a little more about you and about your word, and about how important it is to us, about how the way we treat you and the way we treat your word says a lot about how much we care about you. Just be with our discussion, be in our discussion, and help us each go away with something new. In your name we pray, amen. I've mentioned many times before that it's been a tradition in Judaism, if you will, for a long, long time, to go through the Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible, in a cyclical fashion, and they have divided up those 5 books, Genesis through Deuteronomy, into portions. They call the Hebrew word they use is parashah, and they've divided them up so that if you take 2 or 3, it turns out to be 2 or 3 chapters per portion, and you do that every week, you can get through the entire Torah in 1 year. And we've done that. It turns out that you end up in a few places kind of rushing because you don't have enough time to cover all the material, and you have to get ahead or you have to stay up, or next week you're out of sync. And we decided when we started this that we would just go until we got to a stopping point, and then until the time was up, and we'd stop and we'd pick up where we left off. So it's put us out of sync, but most of our class feels like this is a good way to do it. The reason I got off on that tack was to point out that typically, again in this tradition, if you can get through the entire Torah in a year, what do you do the next year? Well, the answer is you do it again. And you go through the Torah in a cyclical fashion each year. And at the first I heard about this, I wasn't very impressed with the idea. And the first year I did it, I thought, well, this seems highly repetitive. I think I remember being here last year. But as I did it more and more, I realized that every time you go through it, there's something else to learn. And we're still learning stuff. I'm still learning stuff. I've been doing this 20 years. And every time I go through one of these portions, there's something new to learn. And this week is no exception. So we'll talk about some of those portions. Anyway, we started several weeks ago. I don't remember exactly how many, but we're in Genesis chapter 30. Genesis 29 and 30, to kind of summarize, is when Jacob left his family in Hebron and went up to his uncle's house in Haran. I did that already. And he ended up working for his uncle Laban and for his wives. He fell in love with Rachel right off the bat and said he'd work for 7 years for Rachel. And he worked for 7 years and said, I would like my wife now. And Laban had other plans for him and kind of pulled a fast one on him. And then when he woke up at the next day after his wedding night, he found out that it wasn't Rachel who he had married, but her older sister Leah, who he didn't particularly care to marry. And he was pretty upset about that. I'm sure that made Leah feel really good. But anyway, Laban basically calmed him down and says, well, that's okay. If you work another 7 years, you can have Rachel as well. So he did. And each of his daughters, those two were the daughters of Laban, came with their own handmaiden. And so, which I guess in the story is equivalent to a concubine, if you will. So Jacob essentially ended up with 4 wives. And the end of chapter 29, chapter 30, talk about how those 4 wives ended up bearing him. In that chapter, it lists 12 children, and 11 of which were sons, and 1 was a daughter. And we had a graphic that showed how that worked. And so anyway, that's by way of review. So tonight, when we start, we're going to start in chapter 30, verse 25. Chapter 30, verse 25. And I'll read a little bit, and then we'll stop and have a discussion. After Rachel gave birth to Joseph, Jacob said to Laban, "Send me on my way so I can go back to my own homeland. Give me my wives and children for whom I have served you, and I will be on my way. You know how much work I've done for you." So Jacob says, "I'm ready to go home now." But Laban said to him, "If I have found favor in your eyes, please stay. I have learned by divination that Yahweh has blessed me because of you." He added, "Name your wages and I will pay them." And Jacob said to him, "You know how I have worked for you and how your livestock has fared under my care. The little you had before I came has increased greatly, and Yahweh has blessed you wherever I have been. But now, when may I do something for my own household?" "What shall I give you?" he asked. "Don't give me anything," Jacob replied, "but if you will do this one thing for me, I will go on tending your flocks and watching over them. Let me go through all your flocks today and remove from them every speckled or spotted sheep, every dark-colored lamb, and every spotted or speckled goat. They will be my wages. And my honesty will testify for me in the future, whenever you check on the wages you have paid me. Any goat in my possession that is not speckled or spotted, or any lamb that is not dark-colored, will be considered stolen." So, what was his plan? Jacob said, evidently this was before the age of branding. He said, we'll just keep track of whose livestock is whose by whether or not they have speckled or spotted coats, or they're dark-colored. And if they're dark-colored and have speckled or spotted coats, they belong to Jacob, and if they're not, they belong to Laban. Seemed like a fairly good plan, except for those of us that know how modern genealogy works, or heredity, traits. It's not at all unusual for 2 solid-colored sheep to give birth to speckled offspring. But that's beside the point. They obviously didn't know that, or they didn't really understand that. Anyway, verse 34, Laban says, "Agreed. Let it be as you have said." That same day he removed all the goats that were streaked or spotted, and all the speckled or spotted female goats that had white on them, and all dark-colored lambs, and he placed them in the care of his sons. And then he put a 3-day journey between himself and Jacob, while Jacob continued to tend the rest of Laban's flocks. So Jacob started out with nothing but solid-colored sheep and goats. So he had to build, let's kind of review the situation. He'd been there for 14 years now, at least, and he had worked very hard as a shepherd for Laban, and evidently he had been very successful. Verse 29, it says, Jacob said to him, "You know how hard I have worked for you, and how your livestock has fared under my care. The little you had before I came has increased greatly. And Yahweh has blessed you wherever I have been." So he gives credit to whom credit is due. God blessed his work. But even Laban is smart enough to realize that it's Jacob that's the source of the blessing. Ultimately, of course, it's God, but Jacob is kind of like a good luck charm. As long as Jacob is around, things are going great, and his livestock is growing, and he's getting richer by the day. So when Jacob comes up and says, "Well, I'm ready to go home now," obviously Laban doesn't like that idea, because it looks like, well, gee, I don't know that I can do near as well without this guy here that seems to be so darn good at what he does. So they come up with this plan, right? So that first day, Laban, after they've agreed on this, Laban goes through and he takes all the spotted and speckled and dark-colored animals and moves them 3 days away, so that all Jacob has now are goats and sheep that belong to Laban. So this next part, let's start in verse 37. Jacob, however, took fresh-cut branches from poplar, almond, and plane trees and made white stripes on them by peeling the bark and exposing the white inner wood of the branches. And then he placed the peeled branches in all the watering troughs so that they would be directly in front of the flocks when they came to drink. And when the flocks were in heat and came to drink, they made it in front of the branches. And then they bore young that were streaked or speckled or spotted. And Jacob set apart the young of the flock by themselves, but made the rest face the streaked and dark animals that belonged to Laban. Thus he made separate flocks for himself, and he did not put them with Laban's animals. Whenever the stronger females were in heat, Jacob would place the branches in the troughs in front of the animals so they would mate near the branches. But if the animals were weak, he would not place them there. So the weak animals went to Laban, and the strong ones went to Jacob. In this way, the man grew exceedingly prosperous and came to own large flocks and maidservants and men servants and camels and donkeys. I like that verse because it makes you wonder how in the world he was able to get camels and donkeys out of those sheep and goats. But anyway, do you get what's going on? I mean, he, by selective breeding, again, in a very, by today's standards, a very non-scientific way, he bred the animals so that the ones that were streaked and speckled would be which were his by definition, would be the strong ones and be more prolific, and the ones that were solid would be Laban's, and they would be weaker. And so, and of course, this couldn't have happened without God's intervention, because again, we know today from science that that's not quite how you do it. Whether or not they mate in front of sticks that have stripes on them really doesn't have much to do with it. But it's interesting. God blessed him, as God said he would do. And so as time grew on, and it wasn't too much time, verse 43 sums it up and says, in this way the man grew exceedingly prosperous and came to own large flocks and maidservants and men servants and camels and donkeys. So how do you suppose he came to own men servants, maid servants, and camels and donkeys? John?
Well, he has 6 years to do all this stuff.
Yep.
And I'm assuming he doesn't get blessed like 5.5 years later. He finally gets blessed. I think he's getting blessed out this whole time period.
Yep.
And you can always buy, sell, and trade. Whatever makes sense to buy, sell, and trade. He may have had a lot more sheep or whatever.
Sure. That's the obvious answer. Is he would take his abundance of sheep or goats and trade them for donkeys and camels.
Yeah, whatever he needed and whatever made sense for him to get.
Yeah.
I got a question.
Good.
Does he ever give glory to God for doing any of this stuff?
Well,
I'm thinking of like Joseph when he says, interpret this dream, and he says, well, I don't interpret dreams, God does. And you mentioned that Jacob was like a good luck charm, but we all know it's from God. But did Jacob ever acknowledge that?
In this passage, I don't see that he necessarily did, but Laban did. Laban said that I can see that your God has blessed you. Through
this bizarro divination thing, and here's Jacob doing some bizarro, I don't know what he's doing.
Yeah.
Voodoo magic.
Yeah.
Breeding stuff, I'm just wondering I wonder when Jacob first says, obviously he was impressed at Bethel.
Yeah.
But.
Well, I don't think, you make a good point. It doesn't specifically say that Jacob said, God has blessed me. Although I think it's real clear, and I think he will say that later on in the story, that God has blessed him. Like I say, it does say, in verse 27, but Laban said to him, if I have found favor in your eyes, talking to Jacob, Please stay. I have learned by divination that Yahweh has blessed me because of you.
No, but that's not Jacob.
Not the same thing. I agree.
And it's not like flat out. If that's the case, then why doesn't Laban start doing the things like, how do I sign up for this this blessing plan? Sounds
Yeah.
good to me.
That's a good point. That's a good point.
And that's kind of my and Jacob's like, you've been blessed this whole time I've been here, so what do you want from me? His negotiation is, I want nothing.
Yeah.
Why don't you say, I'll take a percentage of it? I don't need much seed money to be blessed, and I'm out of here. I don't have to wait 6 years.
Yeah.
So my point is, Jacob hasn't developed the habit of relying on Jehovah.
No.
Is my presumption.
No. As a matter of fact, as we read through this thing, I mean, we've talked about that before because I sat there just this week, and I like to think on these things. Let me back up actually 2 steps. These stories, I used to think were just kind of superfluous. I mean, why in the world is the Torah full of stories? I mean, it's supposed to be Torah's law, right? Where's all the law? Well, there's plenty of that to go around, but not too much really. Well more than half of the Torah is stories. So where's
Would you read it if it was just straight up law?
Heck no. But I guess the point I'm trying to make is Torah really means teaching and instruction. There are teachings in this thing, and part of the teachings you learn by going through and reading these stories again and asking yourself questions like John asked, what kind of a relationship did Jacob really have with God? And I made the case whenever he was up spending his first night away from home on his way to visit his uncle he had never met in Haran, and he was spending the night up there using a rock for a pillow, and he had this dream, and God visited him. And that's the first time that we have any record that Jacob even knew of God. Or I shouldn't say knew of, had a relationship with God, was visited by God.
It sounds like Paul on the road to Damascus.
Yep.
How long was he in the desert? 40 days or how long was he in there? A long time. I thought it was a lot more than that.
Yep. I don't remember, but yep.
The point is he was shocked into the reality, but you have to develop and work on the relationship.
Yep. Yes. And so I often think about, this week I was thinking about Jacob. I bet you he went over and over again his entire life about that fateful day when his mom talked him into pretending he was Esau and tricking his father into giving him the blessing. And I bet he regretted it most every day too, because like I say, it influenced his entire life. We see here how Laban has repaid Jacob with deception all the time. Anyway, the point I was trying to make with all of that is that we can watch Jacob's relationship with God change as his life unfolds. Yeah.
So we were just discussing this about how do we know this is God's, the leadership was discussing this type of thing. How do we know this is what God wants for us? Did Jacob think about those things when he's negotiating with Laban about leaving? Does he go to God first and say, I mean, it doesn't say either way, but does he go to God and say...
Well, not before this, but
right.
in just the next little passage, God comes to him and tells him go. Yeah.
God has to come to him.
Yep.
He doesn't go to God first.
That's right. So there's something to that. Anyway, so Jacob continues to get rich. He continues to amass wealth, fortune, and what happens is in the next chapter is kind of typical. So let's look at chapter 31. Chapter 31 begins, Jacob heard that Laban's sons were saying, Jacob has taken everything our father owned and has gained all this wealth from what belonged to our father. And Jacob noticed that Laban's attitude toward him was not what it had been. Okay? So this, I couldn't help but think of some of the stuff that goes on around here, around our life today, where, heck, I remember a president who will go nameless at this particular time who said, when you look at a successful business, you didn't build that, somebody else built that, right? These guys are kind of saying the thing. This, Jacob stole everything from our father. He didn't do that. Our father did that. And I wonder, what spirit is it? What motivation is there behind this attitude of wanting to take away someone's success? Because Jacob was successful. God blessed him. God definitely blessed him. I mean, but the other side of the coin is Jacob worked hard. Jacob, he didn't get blessed by being lazy.
Well, and did these guys not get blessed?
Well, they didn't seem to get blessed enough to satisfy them.
Well, you'll never satisfy that.
Yeah.
So my question is there a pattern here?
Yeah.
I mean, I think that happened to Abraham. It happened to Abraham. It happened to Isaac. Mm-hmm. It happens to his sons, the children of Israel, when they're in the land of Egypt.
Yep. Yeah, and I remember in Isaac's case, you remember we read a specific passage where Abimelech, who had one time got mad at him, said, "You're too powerful for us. Go move away." So Isaac does, and then he comes back later and says, "We need to sign a treaty with you because we've noticed that having you around is good for us." So yeah, God, he does exactly what he said he was going to do. He blesses them, and through them, others get blessed.
That's my point. That was the original promise way back in Genesis chapter 12, verses 1 and 2.
Yep.
And my question is, are the patriarchs selling this effectively?
No.
Or are they just like, well, I know I'm going to be blessed. You'll be blessed too, but I'm not going to really bring it up for whatever reason.
This is what they call, I guess, we heard this, lifestyle evangelism was a big phrase here 10, 15 years ago. And what it boiled down to is you don't need to go on knock on people's doors and tell them, have you found Jesus? What you did, you just live. You live a blessed life because of your obedience to God, and people are going to naturally want to, you've locked this person out over here. People are naturally going to want to do what you've done in order to be able to get a blessing as well. We didn't mean to lock you out, sorry. Anyway, those are all things that you serve or need to be reflected upon as we move through this stuff, I think.
Well, I guess, yeah, I mean, I see you saying that, or my lifestyle will show it off, but if they were pushing the idea or telling the idea, says, look, here's what God promised me. It's from you guys. I'm going to be blessed. So can you evangelize that basic idea?
Yeah.
And why don't you become, it's not an exclusive club. You can be part of this and follow the same God.
Yeah. They have not so far done a very good job of that. They have not gone up and said, the reason I am blessed and the reason you are blessed is because God told me that I would be blessed and that through me you would be blessed. And they didn't do that. They don't do that.
Seems like a secret to them because otherwise they would know, and they would know that he told them this was going to happen. So what are you complaining about? You have nothing to complain about.
Yeah, it's a good point. Anyway, so the atmosphere between Laban and his sons and Jacob, Laban and his sons on one side and Jacob on the other, seems to be deteriorating. And the way the scripture puts it is kind of funny. Jacob heard that Laban's sons were saying, Jacob has taken everything our father owned and has gained all this wealth from what belonged to our father. In other words, he wouldn't have been anything without Laban. And Jacob noticed that Laban's attitude toward him was not what it had been. Now that's a little vague in terms, but it's basically the There's a tension in the air. They're not getting along quite as well as they used to. Say what?
What verse is that?
That was the first and second verse of chapter 31.
The countenance of Laban.
Yeah. Verse 3 then goes on and says, Then Yahweh said to Jacob, Go back to the land of your fathers and your relatives, and I will be with you. So you're right. Jacob didn't go back. However, at this point in time, I mean, he's probably kind of tired of messing around with Laban. And he probably would like to go back. He wants to go back and see his dad and his mom and whatever. He got his big problem with Esau, of course. But
maybe I'm reading into this too much, but it's right after Jacob perceives that his countenance, that Laban's countenance is not as good. It's then and only then maybe God says, okay,
yeah,
you're the guy who you're trying to impress, I guess, isn't impressed with you anymore. So now you pay attention to me now? I'm just wondering.
Well, no, I tell you, I think of that a lot because, you can, it's important when you try to get into these guys' minds that you don't go to bat on one particular point of view. But it could be that that Jacob was thinking, man, I'd really like to go home. I really, he's been wanting to go home for a long time. Maybe he has been thinking about this quite some time. But, Laban continues to pay me, and I told him I'd do this, and blah, 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 blah. So I better not go home yet. So then when the situation, the atmosphere between them gets kind of rotten, God can come up and say, okay, it's time for you to go home. And Jacob's in a good frame of mind to say, okay, right, I'll do it. So I don't know, there's something to that. That occurs to me in my life a lot. Anyway, verse 4, moving on. So Jacob sent word to Rachel and Leah to come out to the fields where his flocks were. Okay, we'll read the story, then we'll talk about that. He said to them, I see that your father's attitude toward me is not what it was before, but the God of my father has been with me. You know that I've worked for your father with all my strength, yet your father has cheated me by changing my wages 10 times. However, God has not allowed him to harm me. If he said, the speckled ones will be your wages, then all the flocks gave birth to speckled young. If he said, the streaked ones will be your wages, then all the flocks bore streaked young. If so, God has taken away your father's livestock and has given them to me. So there he's giving God the credit, but he doesn't tell Laban that. He's telling his wives that, right? So, verse 10, in the breeding season, I once had a dream in which I looked up and saw that the male goats mating with the flock were streaked, speckled, or spotted. The angel of God said to me in the dream, Jacob. And I answered, here I am. And he said, look up and see that all the male goats mating with the flock are streaked and speckled or spotted. For I have seen all that Laban has been doing to you. I am the God of Bethel, where you anointed a pillar and where you made a vow to me. Now leave this land at once and go back to your native land. So this is the way that Jacob explains how God told him that it's time to go back.
I forgot about that.
Yeah. So he gives, well, first of all, first thing I'd like to ask is, why did he have Rachel and Leah come out to the field with him? Do you think? You got an idea?
Yeah, he doesn't want to. He wants to operate in covert
secrecy.
Fashion.
Yeah. He doesn't want prying ears. He doesn't want to be overheard. If he's thinking about leaving, and he would like to do that, but he doesn't want Laban to hear about it, because he's afraid if Laban hears about it, Laban will come up with some scheme to either stop him from going or take all of his sheep because he changes the rules again, and Jacob doesn't trust him.
Well, I'm waiting for Jacob to man up and just say, this is what I'm doing. Have a nice day.
Tell you what, after we finish the story, I'm going to give a label to Jacob. But a label. But he's earning it. He's earning it here. So he gets his wives together and he says, okay, look, God told me it's time to go, and your dad's been a real stinkpot in terms of changing my wages and all this kind of stuff. So, what do his wives say? Verse 14 says, Then Rachel and Leah replied, Do we still have any share in the inheritance of our father's estate? Does he not regard us as foreigners? Not only has he sold us, but he has used up what he paid for us. Surely all the wealth that God took away from our father belongs to us and to our children. So do whatever God has told you. In other words, there's no love lost between Rachel and Leah for their father. They're about as they're about as mad at him as Jacob is. Yeah, that's good. I think, and some of their reasons are very good reasons. I mean, I'm sure we talked the other day or last week about how it seems improbable that Rachel wasn't in on the deal to stick Leah in the marriage bed that first night, but that she may not have wanted to. She was told she had to. That's the thing that plays out best in my mind. But in any case, Rachel's not. She's not going to forgive her dad for that. Well, yeah. They got the mistresses too. But anyway, I guess all I'm saying is I don't think those girls thought much of their dad. John?
Well, but their reasoning is because he has hath quite devoured also our money.
Yeah.
So, and in the previous couple verses, Jacob says, God, because what God has done for me, and I learned about it in this dream, I now have all his wealth.
Yeah.
So
evidently, this is.
But did he just go out and squander it and didn't?
Yeah, evidently he lost it somehow. I don't know. Maybe he was
because
high living.
If you're the wife, if you're now the wife of Jacob, and you've got all the other stuff, I don't know what.
Well, I don't know. I think it says. Rachel Leah said, Do we still have any share in the inheritance of our father's estate? Does he not regard us as foreigners? Not only has he sold us, but he has used up what was paid for us. Well, what was paid for us? Jacob's labor. Jacob worked 14 years for Laban.
Yeah, so do they have a legitimate complaint here, or is this something else?
No, I think it's the same kind of attitude their brothers have.
Oh.
There's all of, he wasted his wealth, is basically what they're saying. And every time Jacob or Laban would change the rules about what part was Jacob's, that's what he would end up getting. So God blessed Jacob in place of Laban most of the time. But I don't think Laban's poor by any means.
But they've left their father by marriage, and now they're under the covering of Jacob.
Yeah. And that's what they say. They say, we don't, we don't owe
Well,
him.
we know what happens later on with the Tephilim.
Yeah. Yep. We'll get there. Surely all the wealth that God took away from our father belongs to us and our children. So do whatever God has told you. So they're in. This is just my assumption. What he was checking on was, if we get up and leave, are you going to, feel bad and whine and want to go home and all this kind of stuff? And what he found out was, no, we're not. That's the way I interpret that passage. You don't like that, huh?
No, I'm just like,
okay.
So the marriage is just sort of a marriage of convenience. That's kind of what they had.
No.
Their attitude was, if it was a serious thing, then I'm under your covering. That's it.
Well,
and you've been blessed. I'm mad at him, but
no, I think, okay, I know, let's see, I believe that they knew they had to do whatever Jacob wanted. I think what he was asking is, are you going to be all right with this if we do it? It's one thing it's one thing for Jacob to say, I don't care whether you like it or not, this is what we're doing. It's another thing for him to say, this is what I think we ought to do. Are you with me?
That's fair.
Now, I think that's what's going on there, really, my opinion. So verse 17 says, Then Jacob put his children and his wives on camels, and he drove all his livestock ahead of him, along with all the goods that he had accumulated in Padan Aram, to go to his father Isaac in the land of Canaan. When Laban had gone to shear his sheep, Rachel stole her father's household gods. Moreover, Jacob deceived Laban the Aramean by not telling him he was running away. So he fled with all he had, crossing the river. He headed for the hill country of Gilead. All right. I hereby give Jacob the nickname the conflict avoider. Okay? He waits till Laban is out of town, and then he packs up everything, gathers all his sheep and camels and everything, and heads out. He leaves. He literally runs away. And he doesn't tell Laban. He leaves when Laban's out of town. This becomes clear in the next paragraph. But
So,
go ahead.
what verse is it that he says he deceived him? Was that 20 or 21? I don't have that in my.
Moreover, Jacob deceived Laban the Aramean, the verse 20, Aramean, by not telling him he was running away.
So the King James, just so the comparison. And Jacob stole away unawares to Laban, the Syrian. So it's unawares is what we're looking for?
Well, I don't know, maybe. Stole away.
That's hard. Unawares?
How about stole?
Stole away. Vayigno.
Well, I don't know that one. Anyway, looking at the map, they were all living up here near Haran, okay? And so while Laban's out of town shearing sheep, Jacob takes his wives and all his goods and starts heading south. And he heads south this way. It says he crosses the river and heads for the country of Gilead. The river, whenever it says the river, it's the Euphrates River. So the Euphrates River is this one here that goes up across here. So they head south and cross the Euphrates River. And Gilead is this area down here. I'm sorry, it's right in here. It's Gilead. I've got another map that shows Gilead, but that's where it is. And so he's headed home. Basically, home is over here. Any thoughts about that before we move on to the next? Let's see, there was something else I was going to talk about.
I'm still stuck on this. The Bible itself is saying he stole it.
Well,
or at least that's. See, I think this is the problem here again. He's not respecting law. If you have
Jacob deceived Laban. Now you can call that not. I don't know if that was law or not.
Well, he deceives his brother Esau, and the solution to that is to make a claim against someone to resolve the issue, because obviously Laban. Well, no, I'm thinking about something else now, because the reason, what actually was stolen?
Well, we're getting there.
Well, but it already said that.
Okay, you're right.
So maybe in Laban's eyes, I don't know, that was the owner to everything or something that he had.
No, that's a very important point. We should talk about that. Verse 19, Laban had gone to shear his sheep. Rachel stole her father's household gods. The Hebrew word is teraphim.
Right.
Teraphim is almost always translated as idols. It's usually smaller idols or personal idols, personal gods. And Laban had them. And Rachel stole them. And this is a fun thing to think about. We ought to talk about this for a while. First of all, what are they really? They could be, the typical thing that's taught is that they're, Laban was a pagan man, and these were idols that particular idols that he worshiped in his house that he felt like were the ones that were guiding he and his family. That's a typical kind of a thing. They also could be something a little bigger than that. They could be something that were recognized by many of the people in his community as representative of the gods that protected or guided the community. And it could be, and this is a subject of something that Ward's looking into, that they could be that they're kind of emblems of leadership, if you will. They confer some kind of a status that really Laban was a pretty big deal kind of guy in Haran, and these household gods were part of the thing that made him a big deal kind of guy. And so they were valuable to him for perhaps something more than just the spiritual paganistic thing that we're usually taught. They might have been valuable for political and social reasons.
Well, so the question I'd asked earlier about why doesn't Laban just start to follow the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob?
Well, this may be the reason.
And this is why. He's not willing to give these up.
Yeah, he's not willing to give these up.
So he places more value on them than he places on the potential value you could have with Jehovah.
Yep. I think that's a good possibility. I think there's a lot of. It's a fun thing to think about, and there's probably a lot of stuff we can read about.
Is he's the one? Did he use these devices to determine that God had blessed Jacob?
Yeah, where it says, "I've learned by divination."
By these things?
Yeah, it could be.
Did these things say, "Well, Jacob stole your stuff," and that's his mindset?
Yeah,
is that they were stolen away from me. Well, they obviously, again, if Jacob had an instinct to follow the law and to not be afraid of what that good things will happen if he has faith in the law, he could have gone to I says, I'm leaving.
Yeah.
I'm taking this stuff. We agreed to here's the contract. You agreed to this contract.
Yep.
Even though you wandered off 3 days in advance and took all the stock I was supposed to use to bless, but besides that, you doing that, I still was blessed.
Yeah.
Here's my marriage contract with your two daughters.
Yep.
See, you wouldn't want to be you.
Yep. Now that's where I get my nickname for Jacob. He's the conflict avoider. He'll do almost anything to avoid a conflict, rather than confront someone with, look, I don't agree with this. I'm not doing it. Or he could have done that with his mother when his mother suggested the deception. There's a lot of places where, and we're going to see more of them. There's a lot of places where Jacob could have faced the conflict and fixed it, but he didn't do it. He always avoided it.
I'm speculating, but in reading ahead, where it says Joseph was his son in his old age, I think he taught him that lesson.
Mm-hmm.
You're just a fool not to address problems head on.
Yep.
You can pay me now or you can pay me later.
Yep.
It's just better to pay up front.
That's right.
Get it over
That's
with.
the point. If you don't face the conflict, it's only going to get worse. The consequences are going to make the thing worse. I agree with that. But I think another fun thing to think about is, why did Rachel steal these household gods, these teraphim? Why would she do that? Why would she want to take those from her father?
I got to believe she thinks that there's value in them as well.
Okay, value. There's value in them.
Similar to how Laban feels about it.
Okay, so did she take them because she thought that maybe she can peddle them wherever they go? Or see, one of the theories about of their importance to the community was, by taking them, she was claiming the inheritance of Laban. She was saying that by the virtue that I now have these, I'm the heir. I'm the next ruler, if you will, of this community. I don't know, but
I had another thought, again, violating the reading ahead rule. But wasn't there, before they go to meet up with God, that they says, well, let's get rid of these idols?
Oh yeah.
Is that these? Or
well,
part of them?
I'm sure it was. It was. But I want to go back to, why else would she take them? There's
she's not being. She hasn't bought into the whole Jehovah is the God of the creator of the universe. Yeah,
she might think they're important from a spiritual standpoint. Maybe they got value spiritually. Maybe she feels like, well, I'm not, like you say, I'm not too sure about this Yahweh God. So if we go off somewhere else, I want to make sure I have access to my comfortable old gods that I grew up with. Yeah. Yeah. What do you have, Ward?
Some of the things I'm seeing in these papers I've been looking at about what they've discovered in the documents archaeologically, the ancient documents, was that these teraphim conferred upon the city this sense of royal authority, royal rulership. It was a big deal. So then you have the situation where it looks like Laban, through his actions, lost her dowry.
Okay.
In other words, that's why they say they don't have, there's nothing, they don't have their money. It's gone.
Yep.
Well, due to the way their culture handles, the way things are handed down, the way their legal system worked, the way inheritance and all that worked, she had a right to claim something to replace her dowry. But knowing that Laban, being the kind of guy he wasn't going to do it. So she just took
it.
the most valuable thing she thought was there that was
Yep.
convenient to take, but yet extremely valuable.
Yep.
And this is effectively what she ended up doing was transferring the seat of royal authority, the seat of royalty and authority from Haran to Bethlehem.
Yep.
And this was something that that world recognized, that those cultures recognized.
Okay.
It wasn't that it had anything to do with Yahweh, but for the rest of the world looking at her, she had that authority herself and was transferring it to Bethlehem, which is why her tomb became the third most revered holy site, even to this day, because she did that.
Yep.
For the rest of the world.
That's interesting.
And so then, of course, we know later Yeshua was born in Bethlehem. And here you have the rest of the world looking at Bethlehem as having this royal authority from their point of view. So I think it's something that Yahweh kind of arranged to put them in the position of having to recognize that this was coming out of Bethlehem.
Yep. That's interesting. So it's kind of like slap in the face to the...
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Interesting.
So is that how she got cursed? Because it says, but if you find anyone who has your God, that person shall not live.
That's exactly right. We're not there yet, but that's exactly right. Jacob pronounced that curse on her, not knowing that she was the one that had done this. What other reason? Go ahead. Did you have something else?
Well, yes.
Yeah.
And then, in this paper, it's saying they looked upon her death as being the fulfillment of that curse.
Yep. Well, yeah, I think so. What other reasons might she have had for taking them? The one that I've labored under most of the time, up until we started talking about it, was vindictiveness. She's probably, if I were her, I'd still be super hacked off at what she did about what Laban did about the marriage. Because we talked last week about how poor old Leah and Rachel were in constant conflict. This whole time they've been in conflict because Rachel can't have kids and she desperately wants to, and Leah can't get Jacob to love her and she desperately wants him to. So each one has what the other one wants, and that can't be a happy place to live. And so, like I say, I've got to believe that Rachel's run around just really being mad at Laban for that. And this would be an excellent way to get back at him. Take the thing that he thinks is most valuable of all and run off with it, And furthermore, it's why she probably wouldn't tell Jacob about it. Because Jacob would say, don't do that. That's a bad thing to do. He'd have a lot of reasons why that wasn't a good idea. So rather than tell him, she just took him anyway. That's my theory.
So just spite.
Yeah.
Just pure
spite.
Pure spite.
Yep. Oh, another one I read about is maybe she took them from her father because she wanted her father to stop worshiping them. She wanted her father to, acknowledge that Yahweh is the true God and to get out of this. That one's a little weak for me, but that was another one I found. Reminder of home. Oh, there's another good one. Maybe she took them because she didn't want Laban to be able to use them to find out where they've gone. Well, maybe she says, if I leave them here, he'll use them like he used them to find out that God was blessing Jacob, and he'll find out where we've gone and be able to come get us.
Well, that implies that she believes in them.
Yeah, well, and she might. We don't know.
But again, if Jacob would have just come to Jacob and said, "This is what we're doing,"
yeah,
giving you full notice.
Yeah. Well, the
I don't
thing
care
is
if you see me going or not.
This whole relationship between between Jacob and his wives on the one side and Laban and his sons on the other side is just riddled with deception all over the place. Everywhere you turn around, this is what life looks like when deception reigns. When you're talking to someone and you're thinking to yourself, I wonder if I can believe that or not. They got to the point where they just couldn't believe what each other was saying.
Well, that he learned that from home.
Yeah. Yeah, let me see if I got this other picture here. Oops, I'm going to be done. Oops. There we go. Here's the one that's got the word Gilead on it. So Haran is way up this way, and the Euphrates River is north and out of the picture here. So he crossed the Euphrates. That's where he is now. And so we're going to go on verse 22 and read what happens next. What is what? The Euphrates. Well, that's on the last slide. I'll show you. Let me get here. The Euphrates River is this one, this green one that goes up like that. That's the Euphrates River. Haran is up here. So Jacob headed south, crossed the Euphrates River, and went down to Gilead. And Gilead's down here. Gilead doesn't show up on this map, but if I go to this map, here's Gilead. So I was just showing that's where they went. I'll leave that map up there for a while. We're getting there. That's right there. So verse 22 of chapter 31. On the third day, Laban was told that Jacob had fled. Taking his relatives with him, he pursued Jacob for 7 days and caught up with him in the hill country of Gilead. So he caught up with him right in here. This is hill country, all right? Then God came to Laban, the Aramean, in a dream at night and said to him, be careful not to say anything to Jacob, either good or bad. So Laban was a spiritual enough person, although he was clearly firmly in the camp of these teraphim, of these household gods, that he was able to recognize that God, the God of Jacob, came to him and said, be careful not to say anything to Jacob, either good or bad. Laban was visited by God. So it's further proof. We've seen a lot of places where people that are not necessarily believers in God get visited by him and recognize it as such. Anyway, verse 25, Jacob had pitched his tent in the hill country of Gilead where Laban overtook him. And Laban and his relatives camped there too. So you can imagine them come swarming in on their horses. Then Laban said to Jacob, what have you done? You've deceived me. Yeah, like the pot calling the kettle black, right? You've deceived me, and you've carried off my daughters like captives in war. Why did you run off secretly and deceive me? Why didn't you tell me so I could send you away with joy and singing to the music of tambourines and harps? Like he would have done that, right? You didn't even let me kiss my grandchildren and my daughters goodbye. You have done a foolish thing. I have the power to harm you, but last night the God of your father said to me, be careful not to say anything to Jacob, either good or bad. Now you have gone off because you long to return to your father's house. But why did you steal my gods? Why did you steal my teraphim?" And this was more than Jacob could deal with. So he says, "Jacob answered Laban, I was afraid because I thought you would take your daughters away from me by force. But if you find anyone here who has your gods, he shall not live. In the presence of our relatives, see for yourself whether there is anything of yours here with me. And if so, take it." Now Jacob did not know that Rachel had stolen the gods. So that's what you were talking about earlier, Luz. So Jacob, unbeknownst to didn't know what he was doing when he said, "That person shall not live." So, verse 33.
Can I?
Yes.
So, I mean, we kind of like snicker at what Lavan is saying about what he would have done,
Yes.
but we don't know that's not true.
Well, of course we don't, but I think
My point is, Jacob, through his actions, and a lot of what he says is just flat out true. It is true.
yeah.
You just went off in the night without even saying
Oh,
goodbye.
yeah,
What is
yeah.
that?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, what is that?
So you're giving your adversary, when you delaying these issues,
Yep.
you're giving your adversary the opportunity to
Accuse you.
accuse you and make you
Justly.
look bad.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, we know enough about, just inferring, I think, enough about Laban's character to know that he would have made this at least difficult, if not impossible. But that's neither here nor there. But,
The same God that tells them don't harm him could have said, be nice.
Better let him go. Yeah.
Better let him go, and you better be nice about it.
Better have some nice things to eat at that party you're throwing. Anyway, the thing that's funny I like is because, Laban goes through all this terrible stuff that Jacob has done. And finally, at the end, he says, "And why did you take my gods?" And this one kind of sends Jacob off the reservation. Jacob, verse 31, Jacob answered Laban, "I was afraid because I thought you'd take your daughters away from me by force. But if you find anyone here as your gods, he shall not live in the presence of our relatives, or see for yourself if there is anything of yours here with me. And if so, take it." So now Jacob did not know that Rachel had stolen the gods. So Laban went into Jacob's tent and into Leah's tent and into the tent of the two maidservants, but he found nothing. After he came out of Leah's tent, he entered Rachel's tent. Now Rachel had taken the household gods and put them inside her camel's saddle and was sitting on them. Laban searched through everything in the tent, but found nothing. Rachel said to her father, "Don't be angry, my lord, that I cannot stand up in your presence. I'm having my period." And so he searched, but could not find the household gods. So you can just, it's amazing how this works, because you can see the picture in your mind. This guy's storming through these tents and looking at everything. He's throwing everything around, trying to find this stuff. And he gets into Rachel's tent, and she's sitting over there on this camel saddle, and he kind of looks at her, and she says, "Well, I'm having my period, so I can't really get up." And he says, he just, and so then he comes out, and Jacob says, verse 36, Jacob was angry and took Laban to task. Jacob had finally reached the limit. He finally said, "Okay, I'm tired of this. I've had enough of it." And so Jacob gets to move into the nonlinear region here. It says, "What is my crime?" he asked Laban. "What sin have I committed that you hunt me down? Now that you have searched through all my goods, what have you found that belongs to your household? Put it here in front of your relatives and mine, and let them judge between the two of us." Calling his bluff, right?
Well, yeah, but he's not saying this in a calm, quiet voice.
Oh, no, he's
steaming.
upset.
But he also was steaming when he said, whoever said this will die. You don't say, if he was, again, rational Jacob and had confidence in the law,
Yep.
and not willing to do these things, there would be no reason for him to be angry about it. I'm saying you make foolish decisions when you're angry.
Oh, here.
And that's what he cursed his
Wife.
His wife, the
Yeah.
one that he loved, the beloved.
Oh, yeah. That's terrible. Yeah. But then he then goes back and relives history a bit. He says, "I've been with you for 20 years now. Your sheep and goats have not miscarried, nor have I eaten rams from your flocks. I did not bring you animals torn by wild beasts. I bore the loss myself. And you demanded payment from me for whatever was stolen by day or night. This was my situation. The heat consumed me in the daytime and the cold at night, and sleep fled from my eyes. It was like this for the 20 years I was in your household. I worked for you for 14 years for your 2 daughters and 6 years for your flocks, and you changed my wages 10 times. If the God of my father, the God of Abraham and the fear of Isaac, had not been with me, you would surely have sent me away empty-handed. But God has seen my hardship and the toil of my hands, and last night he rebuked you.
So what is this strategy? I'm a victim, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
It isn't. It you stole my wages 10 times. Well, why didn't you bring it up the first time you stole your wages?
well,
I'm-
I can relate to Jacob.
I get that, but we're supposed to learn from that. That's why we read these stories.
Yeah.
We're supposed to learn from
Yep.
these things with critical thinking skills
Yep.
and ask tough questions and say, can I learn from this, like Joseph, I think, very much did, and not and develop good habits not to get in a situation where we regret them in hindsight. We
Yeah.
dissolve it effectively right
Yeah.
up the bat.
Yeah, it's better not to let things build up.
But Laban's sons were as wicked, right? Because they were right in it with his father.
Yep. We don't hear much about them, but I'm sure that's true. I mean, what role model did they have?
But he said that he was saying that Jacob had stolen the livestock out of Laban.
Yeah, but they hadn't stolen. Jacob just outworked them
Yeah,
with
but-
God's help.
So they could not see the reality because they lived together.
Yep.
They should have seen the daughter saw that it was unrighteous.
Yep. Yep. So anyway, let's go to verse 43. Laban answered Jacob, "The women are my daughters, the children are my children, and the flocks are my flocks." Just like, you didn't build that. "All you see is mine. Yet what can I do today about these daughters of mine, or about the children they have borne? Come now, let's make a covenant, you and I, and let it serve as a witness between us." So Laban seems to be fairly resigned to this whole thing. It seems to be, okay, uncle. Now, the thing that you say, John, that makes a lot of sense is this point might have been able to be reached years earlier, have been reached years earlier, had Jacob done it right.
Well, this could have been reached 3 days earlier if he had enough
Well, certainly 3
guts
days.
to go
yeah,
deal
but-
with this problem right now. We find out he gets involved in this treaty, and I'm like,
Yeah,
Laban is making crazy claims too. These are my daughters. These are my children.
yeah.
These are my cattle.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
So
Yep. So verse 45, so Jacob took a stone and set it up as a pillar. And he said to his relatives, "Gather some stones." So they took stones and piled them up in a heap, and they ate there by the heap. And Laban called it Jegar Sahadutha, and Jacob called it Galid. Jegar Sahadutha is witness heap in Aramaean, and Galid is witness heap in Hebrew. So this they often did this. They'd build a kind of a monument, a rough monument, and they'd say this. The purpose of this monument is to witness a specific thing that happened here. So verse 48, Laban said, this heap is a witness between you and me today. That is why it was called Galid. It was also called Mizpah, because he said, May Yahweh keep watch between you and me when we are away from each other. If you mistreat my daughters, or if you take any wives besides my daughters, even though no one is with us, remember that God is a witness between you and me.
So Laban knew well that polygamy was not a good thing.
Well, he should have known that.
Yeah, but he's saying for him not to take any more wives
Yeah.
or anything. So,
There's nothing hypocritical there, right?
yeah.
Yeah. I think he was basically saying, take care of my wives. I think he was just, that's a good point, but I
Take
think
care
he
of my
was,
daughters. So don't get any more wives.
care of my daughters,
because
yeah,
He
yeah.
knew that he wasn't a good thing.
yeah. That's a good point. That's a good point. Yeah.
And in that same verse, and mitzvah, for he said, Yehovah watch between me and thee.
Yeah.
So now Lavan is calling out. Now he's, hey,
Yeah.
I'm really going to stick it to him by making him, make his God hold him accountable to these conditions.
Yeah.
And it's sort of like, I don't really care what you think about the relationship between me and God. That's my business. Who are you? You don't impress me when you invoke his name and you don't care about him. But I don't know. I just think Jacob is giving him the opportunity to make these claims.
Well, I look at it maybe as unconsciously, subconsciously, Laban is basically accepting the idea that Jacob's God is the real God.
So why not follow him? That's, but I'm
Well,
not willing enough to give up.
I tell you, it's the same exact logic that I forgot who it is, but it's some ancient king of Israel that when asked why didn't he get so-and-so the prophet, he says, I don't like him. He always gives me answers that I don't want to hear. Yeah, I mean, he may know he's the right one to follow. That doesn't mean he's going to do it. People do that all the time.
I know, so we shouldn't do that. We shouldn't put much stock in them.
Yeah, no kidding.
And
You
we
oughta-
shouldn't sign contracts with
as,
them either.
as silly as that is, a lot of us don't even recognize when it's happening.
Well, and we shouldn't even. Why, if you don't trust the guy, why are you entering contracts with this guy?
That's why I agree.
This is like what modern day Israel kept trying to sign contracts with Palestinians,
Yep.
and they're willing to say, I'm going to kill you any opportunity I can.
Yeah.
Oh, but let's negotiate a contract.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
What kind of logic is that?
Here. I always got a kick out of this Mizpah, which means watchtower, was often, well, I can remember that it was, I've seen it advertised as a saying that goes on two parts of a piece of jewelry that says, may the Lord watch between us while we're apart one from the other, and it's supposed to be kind of a lovey-dovey kind of a thing. And I remember when I read this, I thought, boy, if the people that designed that piece of jewelry knew what was really being said here, it hasn't got a thing to do with love. It's got to do with treachery. Because what they're basically saying is this is a watchtower. And he goes on to say, I'll get to that point in just a second. Verse 51, Laban also said to Jacob, here is this heap, and here is this pillar I have set up between you and me. This heap is a witness, and this pillar is a witness, that I will not go past this heap to your side to harm you, and that you will not go past this heap and pillar to my side to harm me. And may the God of Abraham and the God of Nahor and the God of their father judge between us. In other words, it's a boundary stone. I promise I'm not going on your side to beat up on you, and you're promising you're not coming on my side to beat up on me. I think that's kind of an interesting thing for an interesting note on which to leave your father-in-law. It just cracks me up.
So, going way back to Genesis 12 again, we already talked about it. I will be a blessing to those who bless you and a curse to those who curse you. He has no opportunity anymore because of this treaty he's gotten in that he can get those blessings by interacting with Laban, right? That's been that potential market, I don't know how else to say, market share has been cut off.
Well,
I mean, assuming you accept the idea of this ricochet blessing concept where for me to actually get blessed, I need to go out and interact with other people and get them to be a blessing to by me by getting them to be a blessing to me, by getting them to bless me, I will be blessed. Does that make sense?
Well, kind of, but I was going to point out that it says to do harm. So it doesn't say they can't have family Thanksgiving dinners together and stuff like that. It's kind of like I say, it's a ceasefire line. It's a DMZ. But they could, if they wanted to. It turns out, of course, that they don't. They could have peacetime negotiations or whatever. They could have interaction. It's neither here nor there.
Is this word similar to like a mitzvot?
Mizpah? No, it's not.
All right.
Anyway, there in the middle of 53 says, so Jacob took an oath on the name of the fear of his father Isaac. He offered a sacrifice there in the hill country and invited his relatives to a meal. After they had eaten, they spent the night there. Early the next morning, Laban kissed his grandchildren and his daughters and blessed them. And then he left and returned home. So that's the last time we hear of old Laban. And Jacob has spent 20 years up there raising flocks, being very, very successful with lots of camels and donkeys and sheep and goats and stuff, to say nothing of servants, men servants, maid servants, and 4 wives, or 2 wives and 2 concubines, if you will. And he's finally left, and he's heading south. And the action that we just read about occurred somewhere, I don't know, in this area here, probably. So it would have been as far south as the Sea of Galilee, but it's not as far south as the Dead Sea. That's the Golan Heights, maybe is where they did this. Are there any thoughts, anything you'd like to kind of bring up about the whole deal with Laban and how Jacob got his whole family and all that kind of stuff? Let me see if I have any questions I can ask here.
So you were saying that he was a hypocrite because he says, if you mistreat, I know we spoke to this, we already spoke about this, but he says, if you mistreat my daughters, or if you take any wives besides my daughters, even though no one is with us, remember that God is a witness between you and me.
Yep. So it's interesting that he calls on Jacob's God, if you ask me. Yeah. I don't know. I'd like to somehow or another, because this next part, we're not going to be able to get clear through it, but we should talk about it, and I want to set it up right. Jacob is now the conflict avoider that he is. He's been putting up with this definitely unpleasant situation with his father-in-law and his brothers-in-law, working, if you hear him tell it, working his tail off, raising sheep and doing all this kind of stuff. Notwithstanding building quite a good-sized family, and he's left. Not properly, I would say, and I guess John would too, that he should have done this in a more straightforward and manly fashion and said, okay, I've decided it's time to leave, I'm leaving. But he didn't. He snuck out in order to avoid a conflict with his father-in-law, which he ended up having anyway. So now then he's heading back home. Hadn't been back home for 20 years. They probably didn't have FaceTime and those different kind of things. So he's not aware of what he's going back to at all. He doesn't know whether his mother and father are still alive or not. And when he left, the night he left, his brother says, boy, you're a dirty, rotten scoundrel, and as soon as Dad dies, you're dead meat. I'm doing you in. So he has left one bad situation and he's now headed into one that he's been dreading for 20 years. So poor old Jacob, you know, there'll come a time at the end of the book of Genesis when Jacob gets introduced to Pharaoh by Joseph. You know, Joseph's at this point, Joseph's the second man, you know, second big guy in Egypt, and he introduces Joseph introduces his father Jacob to the Pharaoh, and it's the funniest little passage because the Pharaoh looks at him and he says, "My gosh, how old are you?" And Jacob says, "I'm 132 years and they've all been hard." And so this is the beginning. I mean, this 20 years Jacob did this, and it couldn't have been all that great. And here he is now. Now he's looking into he's gone from the frying pan into the fire.
He
Yep.
graduated top of his class at the school of hard knocks,
That's right. That's right.
and he's got a face to show it.
Yep. But Pharaoh thought so. So let's read chapter 32, at least get a start on it. And then, like I say, we'll probably finish it next week. So, Genesis 32. Jacob also went on his way, and the angels of God met him. When Jacob saw them, he said, "This is the camp of God." So he named the place Mahanaim. It turns out this passage is a little confusing because Mahanaim means two camps. And from what we've just read, I don't know why you'd think it means two camps. But later on in this same passage, it explains why it would be called two camps. Anyway, he named it Mahanaim. But he recognized God is in this, which is good for Jacob because, like we see, he's still struggling, I think, with his personal relationship with God. Verse 3, Jacob sent messengers ahead of him to his brother Esau in the land of Seir. Now, let's see, this map is not, it's not too bad. So Jacob is headed, I'm going to go back a map. Jacob is heading down this way. I need to blow this up. Seir is down here. Seir is what used to be Petra. And Petra or what became Petra, I should say. Petra is the east and south of the Dead Sea. And this is where Esau went. When Isaac blessed Esau, he says, you can have all the land over there where the Horites live. And the Horites lived, Mount Hor is the name of a mountain over here, which we'll run into several books later. Anyway, Esau was over here, and Jacob is heading down this way. He's heading south. So, Jake, go ahead.
Comment?
Yeah.
So in the King James, and I think probably what you just read, and Jacob went on his way, and the angels of God met him.
Yeah.
Now in the English, it sounds like, let's set that aside. And when Jacob saw them, and he said, "This is God's host," and called the name of that place Mahanaim. Okay, set those two verses aside.
Uh-huh.
And Jacob sent messengers before him to Esau, his brother, into the land of Seir, the country of Edom.
Yeah.
In the English, it sounds like, well, they're kind of throwing in these two verses, right?
Yes.
And then
Went on to another subject.
we're on another subject.
Yeah, I agree that they seem like they don't belong there.
Well, but we know that the angels means messengers. It's the same word. I mean,
Yes,
it's
that's
the
true.
same root.
That's true.
So my question is, did Jacob send these messengers
Well,
to
that's a
Esau?
very good point. I've never thought of that. I guess it could have. Yeah, messengers are messengers. Like you say, it's the same Hebrew word.
Right. Why would they have that verse
So say,
there?
Jacob also went on his way, and the messengers of God met him. And then he says,
And
in
why?
verse 3, Jacob sent the messenger. It doesn't say it says messengers ahead of him to his brother Esau.
So this proves your point, which you said earlier, is in the back of his head. Okay, God wants me to return. I'm done messing around with this Laban character I've been with for 20 years. All right, it's good that I'm going home, but I got this other problem I let on the back stove, percolating for 20 years.
Yep.
And so that's why it's still in his head. The suggestion is he's going to send these messengers because they're from God. That's even more impressive
Yep.
to Jacob or to Esau.
But these messengers end up coming back to him, but that's okay.
Well, then we'll get to you thought the funniest story was with when he described how every year of his life was tough when he said it to the Pharaoh. When these guys come back with that little bit of extra information, I thought is to me hilarious.
Okay, we'll get there. That's a fun one. You're right. So verse 3, Jacob sent the messengers ahead of him to his brothers Esau in the land of Seir in the country of Edom. He instructed them, "This is what you are to say to my master Esau. Your servant Jacob," now both of those, my master Esau and your servant Jacob, are meant to imply that Jacob is coming to him in an attitude of subservience. He's coming to him as please accept me. I'm your inferior. He's trying to be very subservient is the right word. I mean, that's what those words imply, right? Moving right along. This is what you are to say to my master Esau. Your servant Jacob says, I have been staying with Laban and have remained there till now. I have cattle and donkeys, sheep and goats, men servants and maidservants. Now I am sending this message to my lord, Esau, that I may find favor in your eyes. When the messengers returned to Jacob, they said, we went to your brother Esau, and now he is coming to meet you with 400 men are with him. So,
We
like that.
We came
Coming
to their
greet
brother
you,
Esau.
and 400 men. Now,
And
who would-
also, footnote, he's got 400 men with him.
Yeah, right. And then poor old Jacob, you know what Jacob must have done. His blood ran cold. Doesn't say that, but it does too. In verse 7, in great fear and distress, Jacob divided the people who were with him into two groups, and the flocks and the herds and the camels as well. He thought, if Esau comes and attacks one group, the group that's left may escape. And that's why the place was called Mahanaim. That's why it's called two groups.
Two camps.
Two camps, yeah. Okay, let's.
Well, I just,
go ahead.
Your attitude is, well, Esau is just coming to kill this guy.
Yeah,
I mean, that's your
400 men. That's be the assumption,
right. I'm assuming Jacob can't do anything wrong. And he's his fear is justified and his head is justified. But I used to think, and I don't think that at all anymore, it's they're out to kill me. My God, he's got 400 men out to kill me. I thought I was going to meet up him with just him and I were going to meet eye to eye, and I'd have this messengers with me to be on my side. But now he's got 400 men.
yeah.
He's in his mind, the I don't want to say criminal mind, but the guilty mind causes you to be perverted, to have perverted thoughts.
Yeah.
That's how I read it anyway.
Oh yeah, well, it says, in great fear. It says in verse 7. Yeah.
Oh, go ahead. 3 and 7.
Yeah. Go ahead. What?
Sorry, I think I went up a little more.
No. In chapter 32, in verse 7. Okay, you'll wait for a minute. All right. In great fear and distress, Jacob divided the group into two groups. Verse 9 says, then Jacob prayed, quote, O God of my father Abraham, God of my father Isaac, O Yahweh, who said to me, go back to your country and your relatives, and I will make you prosper. I am unworthy of all the kindness and faithfulness that you have shown your servant. I had only my staff when I crossed the Jordan, but now I have become two groups. Save me, I pray, from the hand of my brother Esau, for I am afraid he will come and attack me, and also the mothers and with their children. But you have said, I will surely make you prosper, and will make your descendants like the sand of the sea, which cannot be counted. That's a very good prayer.
Yeah, but it's a prayer from someone who's has this mind. Let's be critical thinking here. if Esau had 400 men to be able to, at his command, why didn't he go do it this a year ago, 19 years ago? Why didn't he go attack Esau or Jacob
What?
a lot earlier?
I don't know. Maybe he thought he was up there to stay and he would never come back.
Well, you know, Esau was given way back in the blessings, I'm going to give you this land. He gets Edom, what becomes Edom, right?
Yep.
My thinking is, okay, let's get after it. This is my inheritance. This is my heritage. I'm going through with my 400 men, conquering these lands which have been blessed to me by Jacob, by Isaac.
Yeah. Well, it could be. I don't know. I knowing what we know of Jacob, I don't blame him for being fearful. Yeah.
But it also shows us how we must pray God's promises back to Him
exactly.
when we are in distress.
Yeah.
So the enemy won't take a stronghold of us.
Yeah.
It's nice how He says, but you have said, I will surely make you prosper and will make your descendants like the sand of the sea,
Yeah.
which cannot be counted.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. As a matter of fact, it's almost like he's talking to himself. He's saying, you know, remember when you said this? He says, I'm not feeling real good about this right now. But remember when you said this? You know, it's not, are you really? I'm telling you, you said you'd do this. You are going to do this, right?
And could God be saying, I don't remember you saying all these problems you had before. You came to me with them first.
Yeah.
See, yeah, he's I want to deal with God as rationally in my mind as I can. Why put yourself in these stressful situations if you don't have to? He's
how
doing
would
it because
he not
he's
have to?
What's that?
How would he not have to put himself in this situation?
Well, it goes way back to
Oh, okay, yes, way back. But he couldn't have seen this particular situation way back. I mean, like I say,
he wouldn't even left his house left the home if he would have resolved it.
Well, like I say, I'm sure he relived that night or that day many, many times, saying, "Why didn't I just tell Mom? No, I'm not doing this."
Right. I get where he's at.
Yeah.
But if we're wise, we will look and say, how did he get to this spot?
Yes. Yep.
And so, yeah, it's comforting to know that when I'm in distress, I can go to Yehovah and pray. But why don't I do it from a position of not being pathetic?
Yeah, I hear
Why
you.
is pathetic a necessary qualification to go to God? Why can't you go there with confidence? Like I'm sure Joseph had.
Well,
Joseph rarely. You could argue in the pit, maybe he lost it a little bit.
I was going to say, there was a time in Joseph's life where I'm sure he says, my gosh, I must have this wrong.
Well, he got tested. I understand that.
Yeah.
But I mean, in contrast to his father, it's like night and day, though.
Yeah. Well, anyway, here we are. We're going to, we'll finish this up, and I would like to encourage you to go read and think about this for the coming week so we can have some good discussions about it. Verse 13. Now, I think we'll just quit there, as a matter of fact. We didn't get very far, but that's good. We'll probably spend quite a bit of time on this next week and figure out. We're seeing Jacob change. We're watching him change. And this is an important thing. It's also something that makes the Bible, to me, very, very real. As terse as it is, it's so short in terms of its description. I mean, everything is really tight. And yet you can figure out that people are changing through the stories, and you can figure out kind of why they're changing and how they're changing and how God's interacting with them and getting them to change. There's nobody but God that could have put this together. And it's worth thinking about and talking about. I'll quit. Let me close in prayer. Father God, thank you for the evening. Thank you for these stories especially. Thank you for what we can all get from Jacob's life. And thank you that we keep figuring out more and more, at least I do. Please keep us safe as we go through the coming week. Help us think about Jacob and the situations he faced, and ask ourselves how we might have interacted at the same time. Anyway, thanks for loving us. Like I say, keep us safe until we meet together next week. In your name we pray. Amen.
Thank you, Jerry.
See you next week.